Why did Nicolas Cage demand to choke down a live cockroach? And how did a single villainous request upend Spider-Man No Way Home? These movies could have been so much different. The expansive Fast and Furious action franchise is full of tough, macho actors, but their egos are a little more fragile than you might expect. In The Fate of the Furious and other movies in the most recent phase of the series, stars Vin Diesel, Jason Statham, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson all share the same demand. According to the Wall Street Journal, they each refuse to lose a fight. Diesel is a producer on the mainline series. The Rock and Statham both produced their spin-off, Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw. And all three are big enough stars that they have the power to override the intentions of the franchise's various screenwriters and directors. Each has a stipulation in their contract that prevents them from ever losing a fight on screen or from even taking too many blows in a single fight before coming out on top. If that sounds like it would get in the way of the story and action choreography, it does. The action is explicitly choreographed around these demands, and every hit they take is counted and balanced out.
They thought this was going to be a street fight.
One crew member told the Wall Street Journal that one scene in The Fate and the Furious was originally written to have The Rock lying down while Vin Diesel stood above him. The Rock apparently had the scene changed so that he would be sitting up to avoid looking weak. It's hard to believe today, but Alien 3 was once the most despised entry in the franchise. Even director David Fincher has disowned it. But given where the franchise has gone since, Alien 3 is, well, still a pretty bad movie, but hardly the worst.
We've got our own little world out here. It ain't much, but it's ours.
One person who foresaw where the franchise was headed and didn't like it, Ellen Ripley herself, Sigourney Weaver, who heard through the studio grapevine that the Alien franchise was evolving into a spin-off/crossover series, Alien vs. Predator. While the eventual film didn't come out until 2004, plans were already underway as early as 1992. She wasn't happy. Weaver told London Film and Comic-Con in 2015, "I heard that Fox was going to do Alien vs. Predator, which really depressed me because I was very proud of the movies." While Weaver couldn't stop Fox, she did the next best thing: demand Ripley die. Though marred by a mediocre movie, Ripley's sacrifice by plunging into a fiery inferno is one of the most heroic and emotional deaths in movie history, until Weaver returned as Ripley's clone 5 years later in Alien Resurrection. 2014's action blockbuster Kingsman: The Secret Service tells the story of Eggsy, a London youth who's recruited into a secret spy organization. Samuel L. Jackson plays the film's main villain, a tech billionaire who plans to fight global warming by drastically reducing the population of the planet by lethal force. Jackson is no stranger to making requests on film sets, and for Kingsman, Jackson's unorthodox request was to give his character a speech impediment, which wasn't present in the script or comic.
I have trouble understanding you people sometimes. You all talk so funny.
As a child, Jackson had a stutter, which he worked to overcome as he grew up. He knew from first-hand experience that people with speech impediments were often overlooked and not taken seriously, which he thought would be an interesting boon to a supervillain. Jackson drew specific inspiration from Kingsman screenwriter Jane Goldsman's husband, chat show host Jonathan Ross, who has a lisp. Both Goldman and director Matthew Vaughn were against the idea, but Jackson was steadfast in his demand and eventually won them over. He told The Independent that comparing his character's lisp to Mike Tyson's lisp is what eventually convinced Vaughn to let him do it.
I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. There's no one can stop me.
The relationship between Michelle Rodriguez's Letty Ortiz and Vin Diesel's Dominic Dom Toretto is the engine beneath the hood of the Fast and Furious franchise. But their love story nearly crashed right out of the gate. The Fast and the Furious was set to feature a love triangle between Dom Letty and Paul Walker's Brian O'Connor. It was a formulaic but understandable choice. What better way to create tension between two dudes than fighting over a girl? But in Rodriguez's opinion, it was absolutely wrong. According to the Daily Beast, Rodriguez said, "They just followed the format without thinking about the reality of it. Is it realistic for a Latin girl who's with the alphaist of the alpha males to cheat on him with the cute boy? I had to put my foot down." This took chutzpah. After all, Rodriguez wasn't a movie star at this point, and defiance could have gotten her fired or even sued. Thankfully, she had an ally in the film's star, Vin Diesel. She said, "Vin was the first one to pull me to the side while I was crying, and he just looked at me and said, 'I got your back.'" That was the beginning of the Letty fairy tale. And what a fairy tale it was. The franchise earned a staggering $5 billion worldwide over its first 8 installments. And behind all the money and muscle cars is Dom and Letty's love story. Almost makes you want to write a poem. The big gimmick that made Spider-Man No Way Home such a phenomenon was the convergence of all the big screen Spider-Man actors coming together in the same movie.
What are like some of the craziest villains that you guys have fought?
Seems you've met some of them.
Alongside the 3 webheads, No Way Home also brought back the key villains from past films, including Willem Dafoe's version of the iconic Green Goblin. Much of Dafoe's work is spent in the art house and independent worlds, far away from the big blockbuster superhero fare, so there was no guarantee he'd want to reprise the role. Before agreeing to come back as the supervillain, he had 2 demands for director John Watts and Sony chair Amy Pascal. The first was that it needed to be a substantial part, not a cameo. And the second was that he had to be allowed to do his own stunts. Both demands were met, and the movie was all the better for it. When notorious partier Colin Farrell is the most stable person on set, you've got problems.
I'm a fiend for mojitos.
While Michael Mann and Jamie Foxx are both rumored to be difficult, they got along well enough during Collateral to earn Foxx an Oscar nomination. However, Foxx also won an Oscar that year for Ray, and supposedly the ego that came with it. For Miami Vice, Foxx reportedly demanded private jets, a bigger salary, and to not shoot scenes on boats or planes. Maybe he'd never seen the 80s TV show that inspired the movie? Things got really dicey when the production moved to the Dominican Republic, where security was tight and tensions were high. One night, a local police officer allegedly approached the set and pulled a gun on a guard who shot him. That was enough for Foxx, who bounced with his entourage never to return. One crew member told Slate, Jamie basically changed the whole movie in one stroke. Mann had endings planned for Paraguay and Miami, but Foxx's retreat to the States forced his hand. For his part, Mann said via Slate it was like turning an oil tanker around on a dime, but the Miami ending worked out to be the better ending. Cool World is a half-animated, half-live-action film that tells the messy story of a jailed artist who creates a cartoon reality that he can escape into. In classic femme fatale fashion, a powerful toon, Hollywood, seduces and manipulates the cartoonist, while a cartoon world lawman tries to stop them from having sex, which would turn her into a human, according to this movie's strange logic. Though Cool World was released a full 4 years after Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the blending of animation and live action isn't executed to anywhere near the same level of quality. Even more pressing than any technical troubles, however, are the plot and tonal issues, which can be attributed directly to Kim Basinger, who played Hollywood. Director Ralph Bakshi was known for his underground animated films aimed at adults. With Cool World, Bakshi was going for another R rating, but Basinger demanded the movie be family-friendly, with her specifically wanting to show it to hospitalized children. Paramount agreed with Basinger, but settled for a PG-13 instead of the PG she was looking for. Toning down the sexually charged plot meant heavily rewriting the script, which was done without Bakshi's permission. He hated the whole ordeal and even physically attacked the producer who did the rewrite.
Perhaps it is time to pursue other avenues.
Right, let's hit the bricks.
Legend of the Drunken Master is a 1994 kung fu extravaganza from the one and only Jackie Chan. The film is actually a sequel to 1978's Drunken Master, which was an early star-making role for Chan. He again plays Wong Fei Hung, the real martial artist and Chinese folk hero who's been the subject of nearly 100 different films. The original film was directed by the legendary Yen Wu-ping, but Chan wasn't 100% satisfied with the results. For the belated sequel, a new director was brought on board, but Chan was even less satisfied with his direction. His biggest issues were in regards to the execution of the action sequences, which Chan intended to be an antidote to the wirework and special effects heavy action that was popular in Hong Kong at the time. Chan also took issue with the presentation of his character Drinking as something to be lionized, as he feared the impact it would have on impressionable young viewers.
You're going to lose if you don't, so just go ahead!
As tensions grew behind the scenes, Chan wound up getting the director fired and subsequently took over as the director about halfway through shooting. Marlon Brando was one of the most famous actors to ever live and played an important part in changing up the style of acting back in the 1950s. He was an undeniably talented icon. But at a certain point, he became arguably more trouble to work with than he was worth. His renegade behavior and constant demands gave headaches to plenty of the filmmakers he worked with. One of the films he caused the most trouble on was The Missouri Breaks. This 1976 Western stars Jack Nicholson as a horse thief and Brando as a man hired to hunt him down. According to The Guardian, director Arthur Penn caved to every demand made by Brando, who spent the entire production completely off the rails. Brando disregarded the script entirely, instead improvising his dialogue, characterization, and wardrobe with little rhyme or reason or even consistency.
Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me, but I'm under a severe attack from a tooth.
He adopts an accent for some scenes while forgetting it in others, rotates through an entire gallery of ridiculous hats and costumes, and even changes up his character's entire identity and personality between scenes. When viewing The Missouri Breaks, it feels less like you're watching a Western story and more like you're watching the uncontrollable whims of an eccentric actor to whom nobody said no.
Always finish the work, and I don't give a damn whether or not I get paid.
Man on the Moon is a biopic on comedian and performance artist Andy Kaufman made by two-time Oscar-winning director Milos Forman. Kaufman was a larger-than-life personality, and filling his shoes was sure to be a tall order no matter who took on the role. Jim Carrey turned in an extraordinary performance and even took home a Golden Globe for his work, but there were significant, unforeseeable costs incurred by his approach to the role. Carrey took a hardcore method acting approach to the role of Kaufman, which also meant inhabiting Tony Clifton, a persona occasionally adopted by Kaufman. Carrey, as both Kaufman and Clifton, made constant, unreasonable demands and remained in character for almost the entire duration of the 4-month shoot.
You'll start now when Andy steps in, you know?
I step in.
Yeah.
He demanded that he only be addressed by his characters' names, and generally caused chaos on set that Forman did his best to straighten out. The volume of Carrey's uncontrollable antics on set was so substantial that they warranted an entire feature-length documentary, Jim and Andy: The Great Beyond, released nearly 2 decades later. Some of his craziest antics included forcing people to fight him off camera, getting a convertible only to immediately crash it on purpose, and interacting with Kaufman's actual family while saying he really was Kaufman's spirit in Carrey's body.
What are we gonna do?
I don't know.
From acclaimed German filmmaker Werner Herzog, Aguirre, The Wrath of God is a historical epic about a group of conquistadors in search of El Dorado. Klaus Kinski stars as the title character, and he and Herzog would wind up working together as director and star on 4 additional films, though they nearly killed each other on this first outing. Kinski has a reputation as a fantastic performer, but also as an exceptionally incendiary individual. He was known to be volatile, destructive, and violent on and off of film sets. Herzog and Kinski had an explosive love-hate relationship that saw near-constant screaming and physical attacks on their film sets, as chronicled in Herzog's documentary My Best Fiend. Herzog described Kinski as obsessed with money, and on their first collaboration, Aguirre, he took up a full third of the budget with his salary alone. After shooting in the Amazon jungle had wrapped, Kinski was needed to record some automated dialogue replacement lines. Because he hated the film, Kinski demanded $1 million for 1.5 days of ADR when he knew the budget had run dry and Herzog himself was flat broke at the time. This demand forced Herzog to loop some of Aguirre's lines with a voice actor doing a Kinski impression. Following up the successful first movie, The Expendables 2 was an even bigger smash hit success at the box office. Just like the previous outing, the big selling point of the sequel is the massive collection of action stars.
I'm back.
Most of the cast of the original returned, and new additions to the cast were made with the likes of Jean-Claude Van Damme, Scott Adkins, and of course, Chuck Norris. Norris hadn't appeared in a movie in the better part of a decade, and it had been even longer since he starred in a film that didn't go straight to video or air on TV. After reading the script, Norris had one major demand before he would agree to sign on to the project. It might sound like his priorities are out of whack, but Norris is apparently fine with murdering countless people on screen, but refuses refuses to be part of a film that includes swear words. In an interview with Polish publication Gazeta, he said, "I don't play in movies like this. Due to that, I said I won't be a part of that if the hardcore language is not erased. Producers accepted my conditions, and the movie will be classified in the category of PG-13. This ended up only being half true. The explicit swearing was removed as Norris demanded, but the movie was still rated R for copious amounts of violence. The next sequel actually was rated PG-13 after much of the bloodshed was removed. Sidney Lumet's 1975 heist film is an enduring classic of the genre. While most bank robbery movies focus on intricate plotting, suspense, and action, Dog Day Afternoon takes a decidedly different approach. Based on a true story, the film displays a commendable commitment to naturalism and is all about the interpersonal drama of those involved in the robbery.
He wants to kill me so bad he can taste it.
I'm always gonna kill anybody.
After 3 weeks of rehearsals to explore the character and become comfortable in the role, Al Pacino felt like he still didn't have it nailed down. When the first day of shooting was in the can and they were looking at rushes, Pacino knew he had a major request to make. He wanted to throw out everything they already shot and start over from scratch. A night of hard drinking led Pacino to the key to why his performance wasn't working: his glasses. Sonny was supposed to wear glasses throughout the film, but Pacino wanted to ditch them. As was recalled in his biography, Al Pacino, A Life on the Wire, Pacino said, "No, hold it. He wouldn't be wearing glasses. Ordinarily he would, but on the day of the heist, he would have forgotten them because subconsciously he wanted to get caught." Demanding to reshoot an entire day's work for a seemingly minor costuming detail couldn't have been an easy sell, but Pacino's reasoning struck true with Lumet, and the glasses were left out of the film entirely, and the first day was reshot. Vampire's Kiss tells the story of a businessman's descent into lunacy after he thinks he's bitten by a vampire and is slowly transforming into one. The film is most notable for containing one of the absolute zaniest Nicolas Cage performances in a career chock full of bonkers off-the-wall performances.
I couldn't think of a more horrible job if I wanted to. And you have to do it.
In one scene, Cage was initially supposed to down some raw eggs, but he didn't think that went far enough to shock audiences. Cage wanted to swap out the eggs for a cockroach and demanded that it be a real live cockroach instead of a prop. The director relented, and Cage ended up eating 2 cockroaches on set. Cage also demanded that he get bit by a live bat on camera. He fought hard to get an actual bat, but they proved impossible to control and potentially lethal, so Cage didn't have his demand met on that one. The making of Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 war film Apocalypse Now was a notoriously torrid affair. Of the film's myriad problems, one of the most chaotic was Marlon Brando, who was cast in the brief but pivotal role of Colonel Kurtz. Coppola and Brando had earlier worked together on The Godfather, where Brando was already making unprofessional demands, like making co-star Robert Duvall hold his cue cards in scenes together. When it came time to make Apocalypse Now, Brando's demands grew even more unruly. He refused to read the script or the book that it was based on, and demanded he be allowed to improvise all of his dialogue.
Horror and moral terror are your friends.
He also showed up to set weighing significantly more than he was supposed to after promising he would lose weight before shooting, blindsiding Coppola. Given that his character was meant to be living an austere life in the jungle, it didn't add up for him to be obese, which meant Coppola had to shoot him mostly in close-ups and in almost total darkness. Brando also refused to shave his head at first, but Coppola was able to talk him into that one. Years later, Brando demanded $2 million to give an interview in the making of documentary, saying that Coppola owed him it. David Frankel's The Devil Wears Prada is a 2006 dramedy about a wannabe journalist who takes a job as the assistant to the notoriously difficult head of a fashion magazine. The role ended up being one of Meryl Streep's most popular of the decade and earned her the 14th Oscar nomination of her career.
Everybody wants to be us.
The glowing reception of her performance in particular might have turned out in a different way if she hadn't made a couple of major demands early on in the creative process. As reported in Variety, Streep was interested in the project when she was first approached, but she wasn't 100% sold on the screenplay right away. The version of her character that she was presented with felt a bit like a hollow, cartoonish villain, whereas Streep required the part to have more depth and nuance. She demanded that 2 new scenes be added to the film, one of which was a monologue from her to Hathaway's character, part, and the other was a quieter and more emotional scene, sans makeup, that offered a peek behind the curtain and discussed her divorce. Streep explained, "I also wanted a scene where she is without her armor, the unpeeled scene in the hotel room, just to see that face without its protective glaze, to glimpse the woman in the businesswoman."
Is there anything else I can do? Your job.
The Shawshank Redemption raked in the Oscar nominations and holds the distinct honor of being the #1 highest-rated movie of all time on IMDb. The film is an adaptation of the Stephen King novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, and tells the story of an innocent man who's sent to prison for murder, his friendship with an older inmate, and his eventual escape attempt by tunneling out of his cell. Morgan Freeman had a couple of hardline stipulations during the making of The Shawshank Redemption. At first, he nearly turned down the role after reading a single page of the book when he saw his character was Irish. When he was convinced to embrace the ethnicity switch, he still had an issue with one scene in the script, the ending. The original final scene of the film was supposed to feature Freeman on the beach playing the harmonica that Tim Robbins' character had given him, but Freeman demanded the scene be changed. He told New York Daily News that he considered the scene asinine and cliched. He also refused to do as many takes as director Frank Darabont wanted and tried to get them to change the film's title to include the mention of Rita Hayworth to match the full title of King's novella. Darabont gave in and cut the harmonica bit from the ending, but the shortened version of the title stuck around. American History X is a 1998 drama about a neo-Nazi who changes his ways after a stint in prison and makes an effort to reform his little brother before he's irreparably stuck in the same destructive mindset. This drama was the fourth feature film of Edward Norton's career, and it proved to be a defining role and earned him an Academy Award nomination. However, Norton's impressive performance came with some baggage behind the scenes. He was only credited as an actor in American History X, but Norton's involvement ran much deeper. At the time of filming, Norton had a reputation for taking over productions and making major creative demands that his directors didn't always agree with. This was the case between Norton and director Tony Kaye as well. Norton did heavy rewriting on the script, which was mostly done with his director's blessing, but Norton's demands intensified once they reached post-production. Norton convinced distributor New Line Cinema to let him oversee an alternate edit of the film without Kaye, which wound up being the officially released version. As Kaye explained in an op-ed for The Guardian, the studio granted Norton's every demand and began disregarding Kaye because Norton was much better at articulating his opinions.
I came in here to tell you one thing. I am out. Out!
Their behind-the-scenes feud boiled to explosive heights, with Kaye going as far as to try to get his name taken off the final film because it was no longer his vision by the time Norton was finished.